Hey, common scientists. This is Lauren, Dre, and Aidan coming to you this week on Common Science with the topic of shoes. So, what's on your feet right now? What do you usually wear? Are you tennis shoes wearer? Are you a barefoot kind of person? Maybe this says something about your personality. Maybe it says something about your gender. Who knows? We're going to talk about it, though, today on Common Science. So remember, common science, keyword common. We are not experts. We are coming to the table to discuss a topic that will hopefully allow us some learnings and maybe allow you or aid you in some value in your life. So this week, fascinating topic, the topic of shoes. And I want to start out by tossing it to the boys and asking them, the men, and asking them how aware they are of their footwear.
How aware I am of my footwear. I feel like I probably am pretty aware. I've definitely had people talk to me about, oh, like, Dre, you have so many pairs of shoes and this and that. I think the reason why I generally don't identify as like a sneakerhead or like a shoe whatever, or like think I'm more aware than others is because I played basketball my whole life, and many basketball players are just known for the sneakerhead culture, known for their obsession with shoes. And relatively, I've been like, I don't really care too much. Like, I'm down for whatever looks and feels good. But yeah, I definitely have become more and more aware, and that's why I was partly why I was kind of excited for this podcast, because I'm watching all these videos and reading all this stuff about foot health and the importance of not just the form and look of your shoe, but also the function of it as well.
I am not so aware of my footwear. I am starting to become more so. Because of a lot of that kind of conversation around finding the right shoe and how that can impact a lot of things in the long term. I did learn that I had flat feet when I was in middle school or something like that, but I just kind of ignored the advice to get insoles and just kind of kept at whatever I've been doing, which is just wearing shoes and rocking it, which maybe I wasn't rocking it so much, but I don't know. That's when I first became aware of it, but I kind of brushed it off and kind of continued to live in my head because, as the other team members know, I'm not the most stylish or most aware of what I'm wearing, but yeah.
Lauren?
I'm pretty aware of shoes. I think I have maybe 30 pairs of shoes, which is a lot of shoes. And I think I probably became quite aware of fashion associated with shoes and with women's footwear, especially partly because of sports, and there were specific shoes for volleyball and track. And then I would say also because I competed in pageants in the Miss Minnesota, Miss America system. And so I early on learned a lot about heels, a lot about shoes as well. And I'm pretty conscientious of it today if I'm trying to be stylish, but more and more I am dressing for functionality, especially since the 2020 pandemic really taught me that sometimes functionality is key. There are more instances where I'm finding myself going to the grocery store in Crocs, which before 2020 I would not have done ever. So that's been an evolution in my shoe conscientiousness, and also my ability and willingness to say screw society.
Yeah. That's probably for the better. I had to reprimand M the other day because we were at J. Cook in State Park or whatever it is, and she wore these like kind of like hiking type of sandals that were really cute, and they were fine, but I told her, wear your Merrells or Morels or whatever that you got.
Yeah.
And I told her beforehand, and then she got there, and like J. Cook is like super like clay and
you need hiking boots.
And she comes with like, and I was like, girl, what are you up to? And she was like, I knew I should have did it, but I was trying to look cute. And I'm like, you do look cute, But
Like, look cute in hiking boots.
right.
Yeah.
So definitely, as we've gotten older and wiser, hopefully, we've definitely come to appreciate the functionality of shoes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanna touch on the discomfort of shoes later, maybe specifically of women's shoes. But let's go to some of the history first. So I was fascinated to find out that the first shoe that was ever discovered was actually from Etsy. And so I remember this research or this discovering of Etsy. Do you guys remember when that happened?
No, I don't know what you're talking about.
Aidan, do you remember?
I have no idea.
What? You guys
You're
don't
gonna
know?
have to explain Etsy to us.
Yeah, maybe I'm saying the name wrong or something, but there was a fully preserved woman that was discovered from like years before our era, 3,300 years before our era. A mummified human named, I think Ötzi, Oetzi, from the Stone Age, one of the earliest human remains that have been recovered. It was discovered in 1991, I think repopularized later too. And these shoes that were found were made of, I think, 2 different types of skin, like deer skin and bear or something like that, and were stuffed with straw to help insulate. So fascinating that it was so long ago. You would think that people wandered barefoot, but there was clearly intelligence thousands of years ago. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, like if I was watching like 10,000 BC and everybody had shoes on, I'd be like, but now, who knows? Because are you saying 3,000 years before zero, or are you saying before human history?
So this says before our era,
Okay.
and I don't know exactly what that means, but the Stone Age is the age.
Oh, okay, I see. Oh, okay, gotcha.
So a long time ago, where was she discovered again?
I think she was discovered at the border of Austria and Italy.
Border of Austria and Italy. So that, for those of you who don't know your geography or you're less familiar, that would be the Alps, or at least she would have either been in the Alps, which is a mountain range that can get quite cold. The other thing, just in general, is that makes a lot of sense why that would be the first place where we would find shoes within Europe, because we all started from Africa and then spread out. But per our clothing podcast, clothing became much more prevalent in Europe because it was cold there,
right?
Compared to in a lot of African nations. So that makes sense. The insulation thing,
yeah. And I think a big part of the reason that obviously Etsy was discovered from so long ago was because of the cold climate in where the remains were found. So there could have, of course, been earlier versions of shoes elsewhere, but these are the earliest version that we have found. And they were not just sandals, they were a shoe that covered the whole foot with insulation from straw, made of 2 different types of animal, and were preserved quite well. So I was fascinated by that. I picture people just wandering around barefoot, I guess. But
for sure.
And I also think we have this conception that we just became intelligent not that long ago or something. Like we are just holier than thou because we are, I don't know, 20th century people, but like clearly they had some things figured out. So
yeah, I definitely have that bias where I'm like, we're way smarter than they used to be. And it's like, no, you just have more knowledge. You have more, recorded history, but like,
right.
But it's like, no, they're pretty ingenious back then as well.
Yeah, and then the first sandals emerged, I think, in ancient Egypt, and they were made from palm leaves and papyrus fiber and raw leather. So I think of the shoes that I wear today and how far things have come in synthetic materials and rubber and things like that. I can't imagine walking around in palm leaf shoes, but I think that's also extremely fascinating that people realized early on protecting their feet in some way would be helpful.
Yeah, I love that. I love those. Have you guys seen those memes like on Instagram or Reddit? It'll be like the Pharaoh 3s and the Jesus 11s and stuff, like when they show like these just ridiculously old timey looking shoes, or just like these fabricated shoes. It'll be just like Lauren's talking about. It's so funny. Jesus 11s cracks me up.
Man, that's hilarious. Where did your research start you off, Dre?
So a lot of my research was sports leaning, since I used to dribble a basketball from time to time, and
dribble basketball. You played.
I was okay. So with sports shoes, so that's obviously a huge industry. It's obviously booming now. Everybody knows, just like Lauren talked about, like there's a different shoe for every single function. It's not 1910 where everybody just had the ankle boots and that just, it is what it is. But speaking of the ankle boots, fun fact, one of the first basketball shoes, so basketball was invented by James Naismith in 1891, and it was very soon after that they actually invented the first basketball shoe. However, the first like super famous like popularized basketball shoe was the Chuck Taylor, otherwise known as the Converse All-Star, and people have kind of thought that it was kind of high topped in order to protect the ankle, which we all know how flimsy they are. They're not protecting anything.
Yeah.
So actually, what I read was that they were actually made that way in order to reflect the current men's fashion at that time, which was ankle boots. So that was kind of cool. That was kind of a cool idea, because I had always wondered why Chuck Taylors looked that way, why anybody thought those were acceptable, et cetera, et cetera. And talking about the function of shoes, there was this huge debate as a kid where most basketball shoes when I was really young were high tops, essentially, right? So you could tie it tightly around the ankle so you wouldn't have all these ankle sprains, which ankle sprains are the most common injury in basketball. I think it's about 25% of all injuries in basketball. Wow. So big issue. And I remember it was actually in like 2008 where Kobe Bryant came out with a super famous, Kobe Bryant and Nike came out with a super famous shoe that was low top, and of course a lot of people, all these traditionalists, right, these fundamentalist basketball players were like, hold up, low tops, like you're gonna be spraining ankles left and right. But the greatest player in the world at that time was the one who put them out, so everybody's like, ooh, these are actually really, really cool, and they blew up. And now it's like, I think I saw a statistic in the article by Inside Science where it said that it's about 50-50 for high tops and low tops in the NBA. But I think like in college, like everybody, like if you weren't rocking low tops at my college, my university playing basketball, it was like you were definitely on the outer crowd and all that type of stuff. And then you'll see like a lot of like post players or players who aren't supposed to be as flashy wearing high tops. But for the most part, like if you don't have the low top Kobe's or whatever it might be, KDs, it's like you're not really rocking.
You're not with the times. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You're not. So on the kind of fashion sneakerhead side of things, there's that. And then on the more scientific side, there's been a number of studies now that for the most part that have shown very little evidence that a high top or a low top significantly impacts function in and of itself or impacts ankle sprains at all. Because if you think about ankle sprains, the reason why basketball is so prone to it is because of the jumping, right? And the more you jump, the more likelihood that you land on somebody's ankle. Because you're jumping in these very crowded spaces in basketball. And no ankle support is going to be strong enough. Maybe a really, really strong ankle brace will help. But like no shoe is really going to stop that level of force coming down. So there isn't really any reason to think about that. Which is I'm still kind of a high top guy. Like in my head, I'm just like, I had quite a bit of ankle sprains as a kid, and I'm still like, oh, I gotta need my high tops. But then I did see like there is some evidence. It isn't conclusive, but there's some evidence that high tops actually can cause you to stress out, like get an Achilles tendinopathy more often.
Interesting.
And I was like, no.
So I didn't look into specific research about high top versus low top, and definitely not specific to basketball. But I did watch with Aidan a documentary that talked about Tinker Hatfield and his journey designing the Air Jordan. And as not a basketball player, what he said that resonated that you didn't just talk about were the quick stops and turns that basketball players often have to utilize. And I think that what Tinker was saying was that for quick stops and turns, not so much about rolling your ankle, but for those things, a lot of players enjoyed a little additional structural support. But the thing that I thought was so wild that he said in this documentary was that, and he knew that, ultimately shoes are not serving their highest purpose, because what really would be needed would be a shoe that could loosen up when you're standing around to do a free throw, and then tighten up when it really does need to be tight for those quick turns and things. Because he explained that if you look at a basketball player who's been playing for a long time and examined their feet after 10 or 15 years of professional ball, that their feet are just looking awful. Like, I mean, that they have taken so much wear and tear and damage. And so really what a basketball player would need would be a shoe that knew when do you need to be tight so that you can do quick turns and things, and when do you need to be like loosening up so that your foot can breathe. And so I thought that was so fascinating to have such a versatile, complex scientific approach to a shoe. I was just blown away.
Yeah. No, for sure. A couple things. First off, I mean, tinkering, what you're bringing up is definitely onto something. I think it's a little bit more complex, or a little bit of a different reason than you would think for a high top shoe, which you're talking about with the cutting and the changing directions and all the ankle stuff. So number one, a lot of players cited liking low cut shoes because they felt like they had more ankle freedom. They actually felt like they had more ankle mobility. And I've heard that, like, that was in the article, but also I've heard that personally, like people feeling too constricted by high top shoes. And then also there was in a study they did with taping ankles. So there's people think that the reason why ankle tape or whatever would protect you is because it's tightening stuff up, so it makes you sturdier. But over the course of a game, it doesn't take long for that tape to get loose. So what they have theorized is actually the reason why it helps is actually because of proprioception, because the tape is touching your ankle. It's actually sending signals to your brain. So your brain is actually more receptive to changes and possible risks in your ankle so that your muscles can brace for things.
Wild.
Yeah. Wow. So that was interesting.
Yeah. I also hadn't thought prior to the research for this cast much about caring for my feet outside of going to a nail salon, which seems really
very
different things. But I just connected it also listening.
Super different things.
I mean, but really,
it's fair.
I connected it while we were watching this documentary, and Tinker Hatfield is talking about people just destroying their feet in a basketball career specifically, because that's what he was used to, and after so many years. And I thought to myself, when is a time I have been conscientious of caring for my feet?
Yeah.
And the only thing I could think of was when I might go get a pedicure and someone sands off. That's not the right word. Like when someone scrubs your foot and makes sure that everything is exfoliated. And I think that's the only time I've ever thought about saying to myself, wow, I'm really taking care of my foot right now.
Right.
I rarely have ever gone to the store to buy a shoe saying, oh, I'm going to keep good care of my feet. More so, I have worn shoes till they're totally broken down. I mean, the air in the bottom of my running shoes is it's burst. If it's gel, it's burst or whatever. And there are holes in them, and I just cannot run in them anymore. They've started to cause me pain, which is probably miles and miles after I should have gotten rid of them. So, it was just this fascinating experience of research, and I was like, man, common science is telling me that I should maybe take better care of my feet.
Yeah.
Dumb.
Ask some questions.
Ask some questions.
Run some experiments.
Why do my feet look like
what is this inconvenient truth? I might actually have to buy shoes that are meant for things. Dumb.
Yeah. Fun fact, I went to the doctor a couple months ago, and I had them check out my feet. And this doctor was just looking at me and asking questions or whatever. And then he just looks at my feet, and he's just like, you just have basketball feet. I was like,
okay. You have basketball feet?
Yeah, I was like, is this a condition? Is this something I can be treated for? He's just like, nah. He's just like, obviously it's just kind of seems weird. It's like two grown men. I got my feet up and my toes out. And he's playing with my toes. And he's just like, those are just basketball feet. And I was just like, okay. And then obviously,
Did
like,
he
he didn't
explain what that meant at all?
Well, he just like every time I see basketball players, people who've been playing basketball for years and years, they just look like this. They're just beat up. They're
Dang.
bruised. They're this. They're that. There's like all these things, just like Tinker was talking about.
Yeah.
And then I was just like, okay. I went home, and then a month later, got that $300 bill to get told that I had basketball feet. So, shout out to the healthcare
man.
system.
Shout out to the U.S. healthcare system. But man, that's bonkers. You have basketball feet. I would think basketball would be one of the most intense sports or like one of the most stressful sports for your feet. I'm trying to think of anything else that would compare. Just because there's so many quick turns. Like tennis was another big one in the documentary, because when a player is switching directions, I think it's when you're switching directions a lot that it causes a lot of stress on your feet and can lead to some of those ankle sprains. But yeah, any other sports you guys think might be? I mean, there's shoes for every sport too.
Yeah, probably football. You're also elevated on cleats, and it's a lot of the same things as basketball. I think the biggest difference between basketball and several other sports is the ability to you have to jump in crowds and land. You know, and then that's where all the sprains, like even if you don't get a sprained ankle, it's still like more abuse on your feet versus like football. They do some jumping, but you don't usually land on people's ankles when you're jumping, and if you do, you just fall to the ground.
Yeah.
Right. You don't try to stay up and sprain your ankle.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, the other thing that I think of is potentially cross country, because a lot of it is not on like groomed terrain. And so while there's not a lot of jumping and quick turns, they might run a whole course on quite uneven terrain, and I think that could probably be outside of the 20 miles that some of those runners are putting on a day, plus depending on the runner. I would think that would also cause quite a bit of stress if they're doing a lot of running on uneven terrain. But I don't know. That's a fascinating question to think about.
Have you ever put on ice skates?
Yes, a few times.
Being in Minnesota, man, there's nothing that feels better than taking off a pair of ice skates. Like having those puppies on, you gotta tie them so tight, because if you don't, it's way harder to turn. But yeah, that's a whole different kind of shoe. That popped into my mind.
I totally disagree. Until you've walked 10 or 12 hours in a pair of 6-inch high heels, you do not know what it means to be satisfied when you take off a shoe. You just don't even know.
Yeah. So I think your guys' research brought you guys into some high heel stuff, right?
Yeah.
Launch us with what's up with high heels?
Yeah, you've got to definitely touch on that.
Okay, I'll drop a little knowledge that I came across. So what was super fascinating to me was that high heels actually started with men wearing them. So high-heeled shoes were first worn in the 10th century as a way to help the Persian cavalry keep their shoes in their stirrups. So horseback riding, it helped them keep their shoes in their stirrups. And at the end of the 17th century, the Persian Shah, or their like kind of equivalent of a king, sent a delegation of soldiers to forge relations with European nations. And the term like Persiamania was kind of used to describe this time period, because a lot of these European aristocrats, kings, queens, nobles, fancy rich people, adopted heels as a symbol of virility and military prowess. And what I thought was super bonkers is, so Louis the 14th was perhaps the most famous wearer of heels in history. Under his rule, the higher and redder the heel, the more powerful the wearer. And in 1670, he passed an edict that stated that only nobility could wear heels. So he outlawed anyone else from wearing heels besides nobility. And then in 1730, men kind of stopped wearing heels as a reaction against their perceived feminization. They started to become more popular amongst women, except they continued to be acceptable for men to wear in the context of cowboy boots. Like that's kind of the...
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's so funny, though. I can imagine just this. He was a king, right?
Yeah, he's a king.
This king who was like 5'2" and trying to look good and
Oh yeah, he was 5'4" just
trying to get his calves popping, and probably some like peasant came in who'd worked up to get these shoes, and he was looking tall and sexy, and this fat king was like, fudge.
Yeah.
I need to outlaw shoes for sure. Because this guy is making me look bad. Like, I can just imagine some petty thing. But yeah, so I had actually known of this fact because of my background in gender studies, and it is fascinating, but a truth that heels were predominantly used by men, and then the tides somehow just totally changed to where now when and if a man wears a heel, it is very ostracized, I would say, in most communities, and is very feminized. So if today I think a man wore a heel specifically in Western culture, for sure, you would probably get some looks, or people would maybe assume something, which is fascinating because heels were historically developed for men.
Yeah, I gotta just refer people to Google imaging Louis XIV, King Louis the 14th of France, because his hair is extraordinary. It's just, just popping. But yeah, it's hilarious that it is super ostracized, yet it was this symbol of power for a while in human history.
With all the emphasis on the leg, right? So men at the time were wearing a lot of tights and a lot of like long socks with the heels. So they were really wanting to show off the leg. What era of history was that during?
So that was in like the 1600s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So like I think, when was the French Revolution?
The Victorian era. I gotta look. The reason I'm asking because I'm thinking about what
way
women,
before that.
Yeah,
the French
way
Revolution
before
was
that.
in 1700s, but it
What
said that
women
in
were-
1730 was when women started more so wearing
Mhm.
heels.
Yeah, such a phenomenal turnaround now. So one study that I looked at that I thought was pretty fascinating, it's called Occasions and Non-Occasions, Identity, Femininity, and High-Heeled Shoes. It was published in the European Journal of Women's Studies. You can look it up. Shouts out to the authors. There are 4 of them. And they focused on that performative sense of high heels and how gendered they are, in that if you want to perform as an acceptable woman, and so they're saying that when I say perform, the theory is that in order to be perceived as women, and maybe that my goal would be to be perceived as woman, that I would perform certain acts that would help me achieve that. And they explain that for many women that would be wearing high heels, and especially in instances where that is most appropriate. So parties, gatherings, going out, those sorts of things, even work. And they presented the issue that despite this very common tendency for all of these women to have pain while wearing the shoes, that it has continued to perpetuate as a performative act that needs to be bought into in order to achieve femininity. So they said it's a major problem because all of these women are experiencing pain, or many of these women are experiencing pain, and yet it persists. So one quote that they had from one of their interviews from a woman who was explaining her experience of wearing heels: "They were killing me," she says. "They were absolutely killing me. And this was with a contorted face, and I had no other way to take them off. And there were people all around me, and there were other women. I couldn't take them off, and my feet were killing me, but I couldn't take them off." And I thought that this quote resonated because I've experienced this as a woman. I don't know, you talked about your experience in ice skates, but I would imagine it's like that plus hours of tromping around in high heels. And man, yeah, I have had days at the end of like a 12-hour pageant day walking all over the mall or something like that. And you choose the most comfortable pair of heels that you can find, right? But height is important, and you're in this ideal, and you're trying to perform this act, right, to be perceived feminine. And they can just be so uncomfortable, and it persists. So I thought that was fascinating research, and rang true in my life as well.
Here's a pretty, I mean, it's just incredibly painful, something that's even more painful and ridiculous in my eyes, that's feet related, and just kind of gleans a little or sheds a little light into just the bizarreness that can be humans. But in China, a small foot in China, no different from a tiny waist in Victorian England, represented the height of female refinement. And I don't know if you guys have encountered the images at all that come with foot binding, but it was pretty common for a while. I don't know, I definitely don't know enough about it, so I can't talk much on it. I don't know if it's still practiced today or not, but it involved like tying a girl's feet and contorting it to keep it as small as possible. But I have seen, some images of it, and it's gnarly. It's not pretty.
Yeah, definitely. If you have never seen that or never heard of it, it's definitely far more grotesque than you're imagining.
Yeah.
It's tough to look at and grasp. But also, as that article, whatever you're reading said, it's not very different than corsets in the Victorian area or even waist trainers today, to probably a much lesser degree. But
sure,
it's just, you're binding some part of your body to make it smaller and more appealing to that time period's beauty standards. And I think we've obviously, as we're talking about shoes, we're falling into this conversation about essentially fashion and social status, which that's shoes. It sounds like forever and ever have been essentially, a thing about social status, showing.
What is it about shoes? So Dre before this said that the shoe is the most important part of any outfit. So what is it about shoes?
Wait, let me expand. He also said that it could make or break an outfit, but it could much more easily break an outfit, right? Like the wrong pair of shoes can throw off your whole outfit.
It's over.
But the right pair of shoes can make anything look good.
Yeah, you can roll out of bed in some sweats and just put on some nice quality whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna name drop any shoes right now. Unless you guys want a sponsor. But just on some quality Hypebeast shoes or whatever it might be, whatever's hot at the time, and bada boom, bada bing.
Yeah.
You look fantastic. I mean, to answer your question, I have no idea what it is about shoes. It sounds like this, right? It's this whole history. There's something about shoes that humans have just always equated it to social status, whether it be King Louis or the Persians or Chinese foot binding or heels for men, cowboys, thinking it made them look strong and virulent, or up to now women today where, you got these long, sexy legs and you look, I can't remember what the female version of virulent is, but, you just look more evolutionarily sexually viable and all these type of things. And I know you can speak to it, obviously. Probably maybe you can as a woman. I just know that's kind of how, like, the general ideas of heels. But obviously now, like, heels have been starting to be kind of reclaimed a little bit, where it's like, no, these heels aren't necessarily for guys to gawk at me, but it's like women are starting to feel empowered and they're choosing to put themselves through some level of pain because they do feel empowered, similar to, like, I'm sure guys were in pain too back in the 1800s or whatever it was while they were wearing heels,
when they were wearing them,
So
I think that there's truth to that. I personally think that it's really hard to decouple, like, the pervasive nature of something or of pain specifically and the need for status. I would like to believe that any woman who wanted to feel empowered and powerful like could do that without a pair of shoes. However, I also love to put on an awesome pair of heels and rock it and feel significantly more confident and sexy and feminine if I am wearing the right pair of shoes with the right outfit for the right venue. And so I think those are hard to uncouple. And I do and have seen and heard friends or community kind of reclaim some that, yeah, it's not for men, like I'm doing this for me, which I totally resonate with. At the same time, though, I will find myself wanting to get all dressed up for a date or something, and then I'm second guessing myself, asking myself like, oh, well, am I sexy enough if I don't put those shoes on when I know I'll be uncomfortable? And that's where I think the problem is, which could just be,
really challenging.
and it probably is just on me in that story specifically, but I'm sure other women identify with that story too.
One thing that I think, I mean, it definitely doesn't help with the uncoupling of things, but one thought I just had was with women wearing heels, do you feel more powerful when you're wearing them? Because when I think about men and women and the height differential on average, like how men are on average taller, it does level the playing field somewhat.
Yeah, I feel more powerful. I stand up taller. My shoulders are like more level or down. I carry myself better. I am also aware that like in standing up straighter, my chest is more protruding. And so I know that, women and men enjoy that, right? Like standing up straighter, feeling more confident, that also means that your breasts are more dominant. And also your butt can be sticking out more too. I don't think high heels are good for your back. I think I've seen research that has said that, but
that they are good for your back.
Are not good for your back,
okay, yeah.
But that they create this appearance of standing more tall and straight. Yeah, I definitely feel more powerful but in some ways not. So Aidan and I visited Chicago a while ago, and we were walking home from the bars late, and I had worn a pair of heels out, and it was late, and we were walking home, and we were on like some dark shaded streets, and I was pretty freaked out, and so I that moment was no longer feeling powerful, and took my shoes off and walked home barefoot downtown Chicago because I was terrified that if something were to happen, I would have to run, and I cannot run in heels. And I think those instances make me question, like, was I ever actually feeling powerful, or was I feeling sexy? And has that been made to feel powerful for women? Like, the most powerful I could ever get is sexy, and so I better be good at that. And like, I don't know about uncoupling those two things, because I don't think that a woman should have to be sexy to be powerful either.
Yeah, it is quite the entanglement, and I think there probably is some body psychology to it, like you're saying up tall, chest out. We all know that there's power stances, so it seems like high heels naturally put you in a power stance. So even if it is an illusion of power, because you're actually less capable physically
running,
but that is kind of interesting. There's also a kind of a funny little anecdote. The other day I was standing on my counter grabbing something, and I looked down at M, and it was like, well, actually she was up there first, and she's like, oh, you look like a toddler, like you're looking at me like a toddler looks at you. And then we switched because I had to grab something, and I looked down at her, and I was like, oh yeah, you're right, like this is an interesting feeling. Like if I were still a human, but if I was just like 10 feet tall, and this is how I looked at people, there would be a tendency for me to think less of people, like that you were less powerful. Not necessarily that I was better than you, but just like I have some sort of commandment over people, just because it was like such a weird, and maybe this makes me sound like a crazy dictator or something. I literally was looking down at M, and I was just like, if I looked, and I just imagine if everybody looked like this, they had to look up at you, and they were looking so tiny, like you would feel powerful. And there's definitely something to that about heels for sure, just literally having a little bit more verticality to you.
Yeah, the height thing and the perspective is, I mean, real. Like I think most I don't know what the average height of a president of the United States is, but most people in leadership tend to be tall. And I think that would come through. Yeah, just from your perspective to how you yourself perceive the world and then how you act in the world with others.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah, because obviously body psychology and all that type of stuff is really, really important. So if you're always looking over people's heads, like you feel a little bit more versus you feel vulnerable looking up at people holding you in your arms, stuff like that. I think too, even just like finishing up with, or maybe we can keep going with heels. I'm not sure how much more we have to say, but to me, there definitely are these very two contradicting but very vivid images to me with high heels. There is this image of like a kind of sexy woman who's like a little bit vulnerable because she's probably more scantily clothed and also physically less capable of running or doing anything that uses your legs in an explosive manner.
Yeah.
But then there's also this very vivid image in my head of like a woman, probably perhaps sexy, maybe in like some like leather combat outfit, but also in heels, but like stepping like on a man's head or even like on his junk and like putting like her heel like on him, like putting him below. Like I've seen these images repeatedly in our culture where like it is this vulnerability, but it also maybe probably been reclaimed as this powerful thing where it's like, I don't know. And even like I feel like a lot of superheroes or heroine, what they call it, like they wear heels sometimes, and like people will comment on these.
Wonder Woman, does she wear heels?
There is a heel on her boot.
There's a heel on her boot.
It's not like a heel. It's not like a.
But it's like a cowboy boot though, right? So even that, like, would that help you be a good superhero? Like you would think that would, because those are designed for you to be in a stirrup.
In a stirrup.
Like why would you be running around jumping off of buildings in heel, any type of heel?
It's probably the association with the power, like why they would.
Right.
Why
or
they would,
sexy.
but and the I mean it's probably the association with both. Sexy. Yeah, it's the sexiness and the power.
It's both.
I mean they're a lot in a lot of ways kind of one in the same.
Sexiness and power is one and the same. Is that what you just said?
In a lot of ways,
I agree with that.
Like, yeah, I mean
for men and women.
For men and women. Yeah, like being attractive, they tend to become CEOs or like whatever it is. Yeah, you're looking skeptical.
I'm just thinking, I mean, I think that being sexy can be advantageous in certain, areas, and maybe specifically for monetary power. Being sexy can be advantageous, but I have been jerked around my whole life for being either too sexy or too plain, and I can't win. Especially in science, and as a woman in science, I don't think that being attractive has helped me. I think it's hindered me in a lot of ways, because if I'm an attractive woman in science, I must not have much going on in my head, or I must be distracted, or no one can talk to me without looking at my breasts, or, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on, and I can't say that being attractive has, hindered success.
Yeah.
Because I know there is research that shows that if you are considered, somewhat attractive or above some whatever...
people tend to treat you better.
Right, people tend to treat you a certain way, but I don't know about being sexy. And low key common
sexy might be a strong word.
Right. We were just talking about recording an outro and but my first thought was, oh crap, I didn't know we were recording this on a video, and God forbid I'm wearing a low cut shirt, and I am. And so these pieces that women often have to think about, whether it's related to your heels and how that makes you feel sexy or not, and power, I don't know that power and sexy are for sure correlated, and if they are, I don't know. I don't think they should be,
Yeah, sometimes I wonder, I hear you, and there's a lot there. I think a lot of it is kind of the female situation in our society where there's a lot of male dominated fields, and they in the science example, they're afraid of different. Yet like an attractive man scientist can, do well, which is definitely wrong and like needs to be like spoken out against and worked away from. I think that it's just, I mean, it is fascinating though how much attractiveness and how much like even combing your hair and wearing like good looking shoes and all these things can seriously change how people perceive and treat you. But
1000%. And then I think it's just important to acknowledge the other side of that spectrum is that many people who are like dissolutely poor and are struggling like do not have access to shoes or parents have to choose, well, we're not going to get kids shoes because they'll grow out of them. And so there are just a lot more people also in the world who are barefoot. And that's really important to acknowledge, that even to have a conversation about which shoe might make you more or less sexy is like pretty privileged. And I know a lot of our conversations can lean that way because we live in a Western world. But
and we are pretty privileged.
But I don't want to, like, I just want to be able to reference that.
Yeah. What do shoes mean to somebody in an area like that?
So I can't speak from experience per se. What I can speak from is my experience traveling there, and I have experience both in Uganda and in Nicaragua. Nicaragua in Central America is the second poorest country in the world next to Haiti, and I think Uganda is somewhere in like the top 10. I'm not sure. I'd have to look about Uganda specifically, but my first service project in Nicaragua was, I think, in 2006 or 7, and I think I was about 14 or 15, and I brought a suitcase of shoes to give away, and I brought them to an outpost community. I think we were near Dulce Nombre de Jesus, which is outside of Somotillo, and so quite a ways from the capital city of Managua, just for anyone who's a little bit familiar. And we handed out like these 10 or 15 pairs of shoes to primarily women, because I brought women's tennis shoes mostly that had been heavily used already, but were still together. Mostly from, I have a lot of runners in my family, so once a shoe is broken, once you've gone like, I don't know, 500 or 1,000 miles, you guys could probably look that up, you're supposed to move on to the next shoe, especially if you're a marathon runner or something like that. So I had a lot of used tennis shoes, and when these women received shoes, many of them whom were wearing just like flip-flops or thong flip-flops, and I mean, more than one of them just cried and said thank you so many times, and just cried and said thank you. And from that experience, I can imagine that having a tennis shoe with a rubber sole that would completely cover their foot and protect them and carry them throughout the day was, I mean, immensely appreciated and helpful. So I would think that, to answer your question, what would a shoe mean to someone like that, and specifically a tennis shoe that's like built for walking and day-to-day activity, would mean a lot.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it a couple times. I think it was brought up in the context of how people who tend to achieve scientific breakthroughs also have tended to come from wealthy families, and having the bandwidth and the privilege to consider like the universe is I see a lot of association to the privilege that we in the US or other wealthy nations have to consider this shoe or that shoe, or I got to get this pair. And yeah, it is very, very privileged. And I think, like, I don't know what the answer would be. But
well, I do want to say, I think a lot of times people in the U.S. will throw shoes away, and so if you're hearing this cast, I want to give just a public service announcement. If you have a shoe that is connected, and maybe there might even be like a hole in it or two, especially if it's a tennis shoe, please donate your shoes, donate your used shoes.
Yeah.
You can donate them to your local Salvation Army, and they might go to then like homeless or discouraged people in your own community. You can also donate to an organization called Give Shoes, and they distribute shoes, I think, primarily in Africa. We can link a couple of them in the show notes, but there are a lot of options for you to help in this area. If you think about how many shoes you go through in your lifetime in the United
100%.
States, it's a lot, right? And some people get new basketball shoes or volleyball shoes every year if it's a sport, and those shoes can do a lot of good somewhere in the world. So
they can continue to serve someone else. And
huge PSA.
Yeah.
Definitely. I'm gonna use that to segue into one of my resources. So there was a TED Talk by Angel Change called "The Wildly Complex Anatomy of a Sneaker."
Hold up, his name was Angel Change.
Or sorry, Chang. Sorry,
Chang. Okay.
I
was
believe
gonna say that's an awesome name.
Yeah. So women's shoe designer in China, and I'm just gonna kind of give you guys some stats and some things, and I'll get into some of the donation type of stuff and the carbon footprint that shoes leave. So the U.S. buys most sneakers in the world. On average, we buy 3 pairs per year, each individual.
Wow.
23 billion shoes are made per year, mostly in China and Southeast Asia. 1/5 of fashion industry carbon emissions are from sneakers.
Sneakers specifically, not all shoes.
Yes, and I believe the other one was also sneakers as well. 23 billion sneakers. Sorry.
1/5 of, say that again.
1/5 of fashion
cow.
industry carbon emissions are from sneakers.
Wow.
Sneakers equal 313 metric tons of carbon dioxide per year. That's equivalent to 66 million cars' annual emissions. They're made up of the heel, the insole, the midsole, and the upper, and that takes a lot of energy and fossil fuels, and that of course leads to greenhouse gases. Some of the materials that they create with shoes is polyester, or create shoes with is polyester, nylon, latex, and polyurethane. Most of those are pretty destructive to the environment. They also, tanning leather uses chromium, which is a carcinogen. The outside goes through a process called vulcanization of the rubber to make it elastic and sturdy, which is high energy. They add sulfur, and it's superheated with raw rubber. Often includes, shoes often include, the outsole often includes a natural rubber oil, a natural rubber, but also oil and coal byproducts. Producing the materials is 20% of the carbon footprint. 60% of the carbon footprint comes from the manufacturing. Everything essentially is made in separate factories, but then the transporting the pieces is where all the CO2 really comes from in this industry.
The transporting all the people.
Yes, because they're all in different factories, all in different countries, cities, etc. So there's all these, trucks and boats and all this transporting them so that they can be assembled.
Oh, yeah. It's wild. If you see, most products have incredibly complex supply chains.
That don't happen here.
That don't happen here in the US.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Wow.
For sure. And stop me if anything, you guys got anything to say or anything strikes you.
A couple things so far
Go
that
ahead.
have gone through my mind.
Go ahead.
I would say, first and foremost, 3 pairs of shoes a year is a lot. I would
And
argue
I would say
unnecessary.
too many. Yeah.
Unless you're maybe a marathon runner and you do put those 500 or 1,000, I don't know what it is, but that recommended amount of miles, and you're really concerned for that.
Yeah.
3 pairs of shoes is a lot of tennis shoes is a lot of shoes in a year. I think I maybe go through a pair every 3 or 4 years, depending on how much running I do. And even then, I wear them.
I think
to
I
the
probably
bone.
go every 3 or 4 years.
So that was one
for-
thought. And I
for
think
one,
related to that thought, I would say, if that's you, check yourself. If you are buying 3 pairs of shoes, think about the facts that Dre just said. There's a lot of emission we're talking about, carbon emission we're talking about, and a lot of misuse of natural resources. So I think if there is something that you can do to mitigate your shoe purchasing, maybe think about that. And if you are for sure addicted to your 3 pairs of shoes a year, you don't need 9 pairs of shoes in 3 years. So make sure you're donating those other 6 pairs, because that's crazy.
Yeah,
For sure.
that's
For sure.
totally wild.
Along with the process is there's cutting, there's pouring, baking, cooling, gluing, and then stitching. Assembly, so this is the assembly process, is 20% of the carbon footprint. And then, of course, there's labor abuse, which many of us have heard of, like, not good things with the child labor and all that stuff. So there's little to no protection laws. Most of the companies, like these big sneaker companies, they don't own these factories or the manufacturing or anything like that. They're outsourcing all this stuff. So it's like they, like, say Nike or Adidas, whoever, they don't own them, so they don't make the laws. And then also that makes it so that the U.S. doesn't really have any sort of regulations or anything that we can do. Not that they would do anything anyway, but that's another story. Most of these people, of course, are going to be working below minimum wage, sometimes pennies a day, dollars a month, a couple dollars a month. And then they're also being exposed to toxic chemicals. For example, like the glue fumes are really toxic. So the durability thing that you're talking about. So in general, if you run about 20 miles a week, they should last you about 6 months. So if you are kind of a 20-mile-a-week runner or whatever, then maybe you do get 2 pairs of sneakers.
That's true.
A year, which you referenced that.
Mm-hmm.
Hang
on.
Go ahead.
Pause there, because Aidan and I were doing some research on the amount of steps that average Americans make.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it is not 20 miles a week. It's actually closer to anywhere between 1,000 and 3,000 steps a day, which is 1 mile a day, about. I mean, I'm averaging here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're doing 1 mile a day,
about a third of that,
it's about a third of that, which means 1 pair of shoes should absolutely last the average American 1 year, at least. So I think just touching on that is important, because not many of us are putting on that many miles.
Yeah, you're getting a little bit fired up about this, and I definitely understand why. And like, I'm with you. It's interesting because it's definitely throwing me off a little bit. Like, it's taking me aback a little bit, and maybe it's just because I have a decent amount of shoes. I don't think I buy 3 pairs a year, but I don't know. I have shoes, and I'm trying to like think of this in real time. I'm like, like, is this? Because I do appreciate a good looking shoe.
Yeah.
Is this something that I really, really need to consider? It sounds like, I feel like everything you're saying I think is true and right. I'm like, this is something we should consider as a culture who is contributing to an incredibly spiraling climate change catastrophe that's going to be on the way if we don't make a lot of these big changes. And we're obviously, this whole thing is about the carbon footprint, and this is not a small contribution. Like, this is a big deal, especially when you bring up the transportation, these large ships polluting the environment and destroying the atmosphere and all that good stuff or bad stuff.
And I will say too, I think I said earlier, I probably have owned 30 pairs of shoes.
Yeah.
Like 3 of those are tennis shoes, maybe 6 pairs of sandals, and then the rest are boots or high heels. Now, I think living in Minnesota maybe changes things a bit, because we do have huge swings in climate change, and so I have
climate
change. We do have changing climate, anyways.
Changing
weather.
Changing
seasons.
weather. And so for us, like, I have to own, or I would say, like, it's more common than to own a -20, like a sub-zero, super cold boot, and then a less insulated boot, especially if you're doing things like ice fishing and sports outside.
Yeah.
I mean, so I think that's part of it. So you can maybe console yourself some there. But then I would also say I've accumulated those shoes over almost my whole life. Like my feet have been the size that they are now since 7th grade.
Yeah.
And so for me, you can average that over like quite a few years and know that too many of them are for different seasons. Now, I'm not saying everyone needs 30 pairs of shoes. I would say I could probably get rid of half. That'd be a good challenge for myself. But I think just specifically to tennis shoes 3 a year, that seems just wild.
Yeah, specifically to tennis shoes, because I don't know too much about other things, but like you're alluding to too, there are shoes that I wear not so frequently. I mean, I might wear them just for a handful of occasions, whether it be like hiking, my hiking shoes, or I mean, whatever it might be. There are like more specific shoes that those can last a really long time, right? Like, because I just don't use them so often, so they don't wear out.
Mm-hmm.
But tennis shoes, I mean, if you think about it, what that just shows me too is just how freaking powerful individual choice is at scale. So if most people, if the average for the US was one pair of sneakers a year instead of 3.
Miles. I do just want to emphasize that because if I had the money to spend lavishly on the things that would increase the healthfulness of my life, I would spend way more lavishly than I do. Pending, hoping that the environmental impacts weren't outweighing the health impacts. But I just wanted to say that.
And if you're using old shoes for some sort of sport, it's dangerous, or it can be dangerous. So it's not unreasonable for you to want a new pair of shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think a couple of things, but I think the main one is just, as consumers, we have power, and like what we spend money on to or what we don't spend money on has a pretty phenomenal impact. I mean, like you were saying, like if the average American consumes one pair of sneakers a year, some people who only need them once every 3 years and some people who need them more often, that balances out to like one sneaker a year. That would cut that 20% of the carbon emissions to a third of that. Like that's huge. So it's just fascinating to think about like the math at scale, and just it works out if that's what people chose. So
right. And I know it can be tough with like trying to make a personal decision, and I've like kind of quasi tried like a minimalist type of life where like you just have like less clothes, you have less things, you have less whatever. I remember, I don't know what it was, 5-6 years ago, I was like, you know what, like I like wearing the same clothes like throughout the week. Like you guys have probably noticed, like you probably guys see me in similar clothes usually when you see me. But or if you like are following me on Instagram, you're probably gonna see me posting the same. I like the shirts I like the pants I like the shoes I like. Those are the ones I want to wear. I don't care to have, but my biggest thing is not that I shop a lot. It's mostly just that I like keep the clothes that I have, because then they get sentimental value because I worn them so much. So most of my clothes are just clothes throughout the years. But my point is, something like minimalism, or just cutting down on your sneaker buying or whatever it is, it can be really difficult with the society that you live in, specifically with like business attire and stuff like that, because your company is not going to want you to come in wearing the same things every single day. They're going to want you to have the newest, the best, the most diverse type of clothes. And that's an issue as a culture, because that doesn't really say anything about you. There's no reason why. What it says about you is that you don't care about climate change. Like that's what it says about you. So it's just like it's messed up. It's backwards. But I do have sympathy for people who are just like, it sounds good, but it's like, I live in America in 2021.
Well, I just want to make a couple comments, and maybe this is outside the box for some people, but because I grew up with so many siblings, and specifically there were 4 girls in my family and my mom, between the 5 of us, we could kind of have a rotating closet. And I don't think it's so common especially if you grew up as the only child or the only girl in a family or the only boy, and depending on, I mean, lots of other circumstances, you probably maybe didn't grow up sharing clothing, but I want to invite you to maybe consider it, even if it feels outlandish. Like my very best friend, Gabby, who maybe you heard about on another cast, but her and I will rotate clothes sometimes if I'm sick of my summer wardrobe. We used to be like close to the same size. And yeah, I would be like, oh man, I'm sick of like these 20 things. I don't want to get rid of them because they have sentimental value and I want them back, but would you be willing to trade me like 20 things for these 20 things? And I'm serious, we've like rotated stuff out. So I had a whole new wardrobe one summer and she did too. And so I would encourage people to think outside of the box about that, because you're right, it's hard to keep up with these standards, especially in the US, but I would think that I've gotten creative in some ways to meet those standards and also be more sustainable, whether it's trading with Gabby or a sister. So even right now I can think of like 5 dresses that are in my older sister's closet, and I know my baby sister Kirsten has a couple of my things, and I mean that's helped. And I know not everyone has sisters, but you can totally do that with friends.
Yeah, I have some friends who did that, and it piqued my interest. I was like, oh, that's a good idea, having a clothing swap. Shoes are a little tricky because the sizings are more particular, and they also wear out eventually. But yeah, I mean, the clothing swap for sure, I think, is a great idea. And to continue on the reduce, reuse, recycle train, I think one thing that I've found immense value in is going just bargain shopping for used clothes, or I think got 3 pairs of shorts for less than $10 the other day, and they fit awesome and are in good shape, and saved me a lot of cash, saved the environment a lot of stress. And so that's like one other piece. And I think on a broader scale, one conversation that I know is being had, and I don't know how much progress as common scientists it might interest you and make you want to do a little more research, but I think that there's more conversation about bringing supply chains closer to home, and reducing a lot of these transportation costs, given the COVID pandemic. Like we didn't, in the US, we didn't have access to masks for a while because they were all produced overseas. And if like there's disease and things that interrupt it's advantageous and less environmentally harmful to have things close to home. So that's like another cool development, I think, that has come somewhat from COVID. But
yeah, I agree, that is cool. I like that too, for the carbon stuff and for like the labor abuse stuff, because I'm a little cynical, but I think the US in general is just kind of hiding behind, like that's China, like, we can't do anything, like, a little bit. So I would definitely love for more of our companies, factories and stuff to come back, so that obviously for jobs, but then so we as a country can decide what do we want our legacy to be, what do we want our carbon footprint to be, and not just kind of pass the buck. And just to finish up with this TED Talk from Angel Chang, just exactly what we're talking about. So the recyclability of everything, 20% of these sneakers get incinerated, horrible for the environment. 80% are just in the landfill, and it takes an average of 1,000 years to biodegrade.
Yeah, I know people throw shoes away. They're like, oh, these have a couple of holes in them. But those are still donatable to many organizations. So.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll feel better doing it, too.
Yeah. What a cast.
I feel better doing it.
We have gone from Ötzi, 3,300 years ago, discovered in the Appalachian Mountains, all the way to men wearing heels, starting with men, to have their feet in stirrups, staying where they're supposed to stay, riding horse. From there, we traveled into the gender norms of shoes, and then finally some of the problems associated with shoe wear. Somewhere in there we talked about basketball also.
Mm.
But needless to say, there's a lot more common science behind the shoe than I would have thought prior to research for this cast. And maybe this will push you a little bit to ask questions in your world about your shoe use and your shoe wearing, and hopefully challenge you to do a little common science in your life about what's on your feet.
Hey, common scientists. Hope you enjoyed the cast. Thanks for investing in common science. We hope it brought as much value to you as it did to us.
To learn more, smash the subscribe button and visit our website, commonscientists.com, where you can read our blog, join our email newsletter, and follow us on social media.
Finally, if you like what we have to say, you can absolutely support us on Patreon. We could always use more support. You can navigate there also from our website, commonscientists.com, common scientists with an S, so that we can continue cultivating a community of common scientists.